Hey everybody, I'm JJ Johnson. You're watching Reality Survival. So today what I wanted to talk with you about is, and really I'm hoping that this can kind of be a discussion in the comments below. I'm really interested to see what you guys have to say about this topic. Um, and I wanted to talk about the golden horde. You know, the idea that when a disaster happens, that there's going to be this massive flood or this massive wave of people that leave the city. Because I think there's some problems with that in general, and I will say that for certain kinds of disasters, it's possible that it could be a, a bigger reality, I guess. You know, if there was some kind of a terrorist attack that involved gas or a bio attack or something like that, if there was, like a pandemic that was spreading from the city center outwards, or, not that you'd really be able to track that necessarily, but, if there was some reason that was forcing people out of the city, then I could see there being a wave. But I want to talk specifically about an economic collapse. That's kind of what I want to focus this thought on. And the reason I say that is because I think that an economic collapse is probably the most likely scenario that could affect our country. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and we'll save that for some other video or whatever. But I think most people would agree that economic collapse in the United States is probably going to happen at some point. Maybe that's 25 years from now. Maybe it's only 5 years from now. Maybe it's, who knows. And with the concept of an economic collapse, a lot of people immediately go to, in their minds, like a grid down situation. You know what I mean? Like, and when I say that, I usually am referring to like an EMP or something where no electricity is working or anything like that, and all that kind of stuff. But the idea of something like a true grid down situation, and I refer to this situation in a lot of my videos, but the probability of that happening is really very, very small. It's just not that likely to happen. Although it's possible, and we are vulnerable to those things happening, it's not very probable at all. What, in my opinion, is a lot more probable is that we have an economic collapse. And in an economic collapse, we've seen this happen around the world numerous times in different places. And it's not just a bang, everything has gone to hell in a handbasket, and then all of a sudden everybody's trying to scramble and get out of the city and stuff. I think that it's something that's probably caused a little bit by the movies, by zombie apocalypse movies, Walking Dead, different things like that. I'm not really sure where this comes from, because I have not been able to find anything in recent or distant history that shows that this is true. In fact, you could probably argue that the exact opposite has happened in history, not only in our country during the Depression, when people came from their farms into the city, but in other types of disasters and stuff like that as well. Now, the one exception to that might be refugees in some civil wars, when people are being persecuted and they're being targeted and all that kind of stuff, like we've seen in Syria. But again, there's an external force that's driving them out of their area. In an economic collapse, that's not going to be the case. There is going to be a few things that are going to keep people in the city. Number one, and probably the most powerful of all of these things, is normalcy bias. Okay? And normalcy bias is essentially, and I don't know the textbook definition of it, but it's essentially a mechanism in our own minds that help us to essentially stop from freaking out at any little thing that happens. Okay, it helps us normalize our thought processes, and it also helps to tamp down a major emotional response to some big events. And a good example of this is when people essentially fail to realize that their situation has become very desperate, and so they basically won't react. They keep going to work, they keep doing their daily grind, and they refuse to acknowledge that bad situations are happening all around them. And normalcy bias affects everyone, even preppers. Now, preppers are probably going to be the first people who snap out of normalcy bias, because we spend time thinking about these kinds of things, because we talk about it, we war game these things, we stay up to date on different intelligence and things that are going on and all that kind of stuff, because we're kind of waiting for it to happen at some point. And or we believe it'll happen, at least on some level. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be preparing. So we'll probably be some of the first ones to notice it. But I find it highly unlikely that in an economic collapse, when there's no external factor pushing people out of the city, that there's going to be this big wave like that. I also think that the other thing that's going to keep people there is access to food, access to water. Even if they're having to stand in ration lines, they're still going to stand in ration lines to get that food. And we see that happening right now in Brazil and stuff like that. People are not just fleeing the country; they're staying there, and it's getting pretty nasty down there. And there's been a lot of different purge style killings and stuff like that. But the vast majority of people are still there, and that's because they understand that they don't have anywhere else to go. There's, just running to the hills is not an option for the majority of people. I think if you're going to be on the generous side, the really, really generous side, you could say maybe 25% of people actually have the knowledge and the ability and the gear and that kind of thing to even go camping for a weekend. Now it's going to be even less than that. You're probably cutting it down to, oh my gosh, I think I'm being super generous by saying 10%, but it's probably closer to 1% of people who would even have enough stuff in their house to be able to go out into the woods for a week. Okay, so and people will know this. They'll know that they're not capable of doing that, especially during the wintertime and during colder months. It's not very likely that that's going to happen at all. They're going to close themselves up. They're going to stay in their house. They're going to when they're not doing anything, when they have to go to work, if their particular job is still unaffected and stuff like that, they're going to continue going. One thing that people seem to grab onto, and it's an easy thing to do, and I've done it in some of my videos as well, is to think that commerce is just going to stop. Well, there's nothing could be further from the truth. You will always find, in the most crap hole third world countries in the world, Somalia, Afghanistan, wherever, commerce still happens. It still goes on. People are still, going to the marketplaces. They're trading things. They're, bartering. They're doing, all that kind of stuff, even in the most war-torn places. So to think that, that commerce is going to stop here is crazy. It's going to continue. Now, there may be certain periods, where the money is basically so hyperinflated it's not worth much and all that kind of stuff. You're going to see a shift towards, a barter type system or whatever until something else comes up to replace it. Maybe you'll see, gold and silver being traded. I don't really think that's going to be a huge thing. I think they may have some value, but it's probably going to be somewhat of a barter situation. But so why do I bring all this up? I'm rambling on this a little bit because I don't have any particular notes. I'm just talking about it and I'm throwing it out there. And the reason I bring this up is because I think a lot of people have a plan that basically says, we're going to bug in for as long as we can until it's no longer safe, until we feel like it's no longer safe. Then we're going to put as much as we can of our bug out loadout gear into our vehicles, and we're going to try to leave town and get out of town. If we can't do that, then we'll, try to carry the stuff, on a bike or whatever the case may be, or in a wheelbarrow or whatever. And then if we can't do that, then we'll just do our bug out bags and then we'll go. But I think a lot of, and that's fine. Maybe that's a totally fine way to do it. In the case that I'm talking about, I think you'll be able to do that because I do believe that you'll be able to leave town during an economic collapse. The United States military has no capability whatsoever to lock down every city in the country and keep people from leaving. They just don't. They're just not even close. They might be able to lock down maybe our 10 or 15 biggest cities. Maybe. I mean, that's like giving them a lot of credit. Okay, I mean, I'm telling you that they don't have that capability to do that on any grand scale. So all of the suburbs and all of the smaller towns and all that kind of stuff, there's no chance at all that you're going to be locked down by some kind of military force or anything like that in the United States, unless it was another larger invading force, which is, possible, but that's not in this scenario. In an economic collapse, you're going to be able to move freely. So you could, if that was your plan, you could load your stuff up and you could leave if it became so violent. But I think a more likely scenario, and I think something that people need to plan for, is an economic collapse happens. And this is a long, and maybe it's long, slow, maybe it happens fast. It really doesn't make any difference. But you need to plan for the eventuality that you still have to go to work, that you still have to pay your bills, that you still, have to continue to get groceries when groceries are available. They might not always be available. They'll probably be available, at a less frequent time, but they will be available in this kind of scenario, because the people who are in power, who have all the money invested and all this kind of thing, they're going to ensure that they stay in power, and the only way that they can do that is by keeping the system running to a certain degree. And so I think that you're going to see that there will be basic services. Electricity might be intermittent. Maybe you only have a certain number of hours per day of electricity. There could be interruptions in power and water and all that kind of stuff. There definitely could be interruptions, and probably would be interruptions in fuel supply and all that. But the idea that it's just going to stop is not very realistic. So we need to plan for living and working in an environment that is like we see in other places all around the world, in third world countries, in second world countries. You need to think about, how are you going to get to work in a situation like this, where you might have gangs and stuff like that, where it's becoming dangerous to travel. Do you have a concealed a vest that you can wear in a concealed manner, like a 3A or a level 2 body armor, that you can wear under your shirt to work, along with your concealed carry pistol and all that kind of stuff. Have you thought about trying to live or operate in that kind of situation? That's really what I'm what I'm throwing out here is I think a lot of people kind of, their plans are related to everything's fine, I'm staying in my house, it's all good. Holy crap, it got really bad. Now we have to load up the truck, we have to leave the house. Like, there's no in between, right? And so what I'm saying is I think the reality of the situation is there's a lot of in between. You know what I mean? Like, the in between is what we actually have history showing us that it happens. You know, when Argentina collapsed, it was like that. When Zimbabwe collapsed, it was like I'm talking about. When Russia collapsed, it was like this. You know, I mean, when Somalia collapsed, it was like this. Like, it's like all over the world, this is how it's happened. It's this gray area in the middle where there's still somewhat of a societal structure. There's somewhat of an infrastructure. There's intermittent services here and there. There's law enforcement to a certain degree still available in pockets and here and there. You know, it's not just everything's fine, now it's Mad Max. You know, there's a mix of situations. And so I guess the point of the video is really just to make you think about that and to get you thinking of how you're going to handle situations where, you know, you don't have any gas to get to work, but you still have to get to work. You know, do you have a bike that you can ride to work or whatever? And doing so, is it going to be safe? And how do you keep yourself safe on a bike while riding to work? Is that even feasible for you? You know, like I said, I don't really have any specific answers on exactly how any of this will go, because there's just way too many variables on it, and it could go a million ways. But I think as preppers, we get into the mindset just all too often. When the crap gets to fan, I'm going to kill anybody I come in contact with, and I'm going to the woods, and it's going to be all good, and that's that, you know. But that's just not, it's just not a very great way to think about things. I think we need to focus on how do we operate in that gray world where it's kind of in between the two, and, you know, are you a part of a group to help you deal with security and stuff like that? Have you talked to your neighbors? Have you made relationships with these people? You know, have you tried to get them to start preparing so that they have a little more food, you know, on hand, so that they're not threatening you and stuff like that? You know, we need to start thinking about how we can come together as people and live in these, like, you know, this murky gray area that's somewhere in between everything's okay and holy cow, it's Mad Max, you know. So anyway, I've rambled on probably way too long, and I'm sorry I didn't have any, like, direct points that I wanted to make on this. But I think it's an important thing to think about. So hopefully that has spurred some thought. I would be curious to know how you think, or what you think is the most likely cause of a collapse in our country. And how do you think it's going to go? You know, do you think it'll be like, boom, you know, it's all gone crazy and it just falls to hell really quick? Or do you think it's going to be the long, slow slide, and then all of a sudden, you know, a few years, we're going to look back and go, wow, the SHTF, it happened back there, like way back up here. You know, we didn't even realize it. It was just this, you know, continual progression. That's kind of what my thought is that that's the most likely scenario. It's fun to talk about the real sudden scenarios and the EMPs going off and all that kind of stuff, because those are bad things that are going to be very difficult to survive. But I think we also need to think about that middle zone. So anyway, guys, I appreciate you watching and listening to my ramblings. This definitely wasn't scripted. And if you like videos that talk about disaster preparedness, wilderness survival, or outdoor gear reviews, then please click the subscribe button. If you're already subscribed, then don't forget to click the little bell button right next to it. That'll send you an email that will let you know each time we upload. As always, guys, I definitely appreciate it when you click the thumbs up button, when you share it with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, and Google+. And don't forget to live the 6 Ps. Proper prior preparation prevents poor performance. Stay safe, guys.